All right, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
There we go. That's what an education audience does. We have a terrific panel this morning on a really fascinating issue, school choice, the increase in conversation about parents, parent involvement, new organizations that are working with parents. We have public sector officials. It's going to be great. And before we start, I just want to really thank the Reagan Institute and Foundation for putting this panel together. I think a lot of us here, I see a lot of friends around the room. We go to a lot of education conversations in which you essentially get are three flavors of vanilla. You know, diverse opinions mean you might get like French vanilla, and if someone's feeling really edgy, you get, you know, cherry vanilla. This is not that panel, and I think that's a real credit to them that they brought together people who look at these questions differently for a conversation about that, and I think that's too rare, and I want to call that out. And I think it's going to be a fantastic panel. I think we're going to find a lot of areas of common ground, as long as we don't talk about, you know, education. No, I think it's going to be a fantastic discussion. I'm really excited. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, like to talk about their roles. But just so, Katie Jenner, state chief in Indiana, fantastic state chief out there doing great work in a great state. Tiffany Justice with Moms for Liberty. Ralph Smith, Ralph's with the campaign. I first got to know Ralph like a long time ago in a foundation world, probably longer ago than either of us care to admit, but now campaign for grade level reading, and Kerry Rodriguez with the National Parents Union. And they could talk a little bit more about sort of geographically where they're situated and other things. But I want to start, reading has come up this morning on some of the different panels in different ways and so forth. Like there's two things happening right now. There's like there's decentralizing trends like choice, things are happening with parents. Then there's these centralizing trends like getting serious about teaching reading. And despite all the rhetoric, like nothing's happening. Like 40 states have like addressed reading. There's lots of activity happening there. And so I was hoping you would talk about like in that chief's seat, what that looks like, and then specifically what you're doing in Indiana.
Yeah, so in Indiana, like other states in our country, we did not have a choice. We had to attack reading and attack it head on. In our state in particular, 1 in 5 third graders is not able to read by the end of that year. And then we built out a heat map that's live. All of you can look at the state of Indiana and where it's green and where it's yellow and where it's red. And the interesting part about that heat map is there was red in urban, there was red in rural, there was red in suburban. So it's scattered all over our state. And so we knew we had to attack it head on. And I can't not call out Dr. Carrie Wright in the room. The Mississippi Miracle is driving our nation. And that conversation comes up so frequently in Indiana, and we use a lot of their tactics that you deployed. We've learned from you to drive the ball forward. A couple things that I'd call out in the area of reading that we're systematically approaching. One massive one is our educator prep college situation. The General Assembly passed some laws to require science of reading to be a throughway throughout our educator prep college. And then also that 3Qing, that teaching would no longer be allowed. I sent a letter in partnership with our Commissioner for Higher Ed to every president, provost, and dean in the state of Indiana, and have offered to meet with them and any professor who would want to. Lilly Endowment invested $25 million to help us move quickly. They have 1 year to prepare, and then this coming year they have to be doing it. And if they're not, then as State Board of Education chair, I can ask that their accreditation be stripped. And then the other thing I would add is we have a lot of synergy and relationships. Our lieutenant governor is here. We were talking about this yesterday in the airport. And in Indiana, so my phone's right here, everyone's just like a quick call away. So if I hear about a professor that is going rogue at this university, I pick up the phone, I call the president, and I call where their money's coming from. And we're just not messing around. We have to unapologetically attack this. That's one of several different pieces. We obviously support for our future teachers, current teachers, quality curriculum list. and then measurement. And again, Andy, I'm glad to go into more detail as helpful, but I know we're short on time.
No, this is great, and the Mississippi, I'm glad
See right there.
that Carrie got over my shoulder. Carrie got the call out. We had a really fascinating. I didn't introduce myself, but one of the things I do is I'm on the state board in Virginia, and we had a really fascinating thing where somebody was like, "You guys are being critical of where we are. You're talking like we're Mississippi," and it was like, well, actually, we're not Mississippi. Like, black kids and Hispanic kids in Mississippi are outperforming our youngsters right now, and that's why we need to get serious about that, and that owes to the work that Carrie did. Ralph, tell me why this is going to be different. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. There's a Lucy in the football quality to literacy work. I mean, we had at one point $1 billion federal program, what we now call the science of reading. You know, Reed Lyon and George Bush were working on in Texas when he was a governor. So what's different this time? You've been at this a long time. What's different this time in your view in terms of this staying as a reform and a change?
No, you know, Andy so far has talked about how long we've known each other and how long I've been at this. Let me acknowledge that I'm almost old enough to run for president. Let me just put that on the table. So, but nothing I say here should be seen as as a preparation for a campaign. Like, you know, and I've got to take, you know, you've got to take your shot when you get a chance. And with Dr. Carrie Wright in the room, she will remember that the first year she was in Mississippi, I had an opportunity to go down and speak to the youth. And I said to that group, somebody's going to break through. And with Dr. Carrie Wright here, my question is, why not Mississippi? Yeah. You know, you say that stuff because I adore Carrie. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you say it because it's the right thing to say. But could I tell you that if I told you that I imagined how true that would be 8 years later, I would be lying. I had no idea how true it would be. I knew she would make a difference. But the difference she made, not only that state, but for the rest of us. And I'm really glad that you began that. It's for the rest of us. Carrie, you really deserve our appreciation.
Pull up a chair, Carrie. Join the panel. Come on.
Okay, as a Virginian, I have to now, like, that's enough adulation for somebody who's now the state chief of Maryland. So
what I think is different, could be different. One, we're looking at where it's done. You know, I'm a university professor, so I've got to say I believe in research. I don't believe in research enough to go out and act on it, because not enough research has been informed by practice. In fact, the big question in research is how do we get practice to emulate the research, which is the reverse, which is the wrong question. The question is, how do we get research that's informed by and supportive of practice? And I love the fact that you say, here's where it happened. Let's look at what happened. Let's look at why it is. Take it apart. And let's see whether we could re-engineer success. And I think this, having bright spots and having exemplars and being willing to learn with them and from them is really the most promising thing. It's not the legislation saying yes to this and outlawing that. It is the willingness of the folks who are going to implement it to have the perspective and the humility to say, we don't know everything, but we can learn a hell of a lot from the people who have succeeded. And that's what I sense in chiefs around the country. And Carrie is getting a lot of credit, which embarrasses the hell out of her. And we all are complicit a bit, but we can learn from her. We can learn from what is happening in Indiana. I love the chief this morning in South Dakota who actually answered the question directly.
North.
Hey, I'm old enough to run for president. You know, I thought North Dakota chief answered the question clearly about the distractions, and I think the willingness of chiefs to step up and said, this is a distraction. This is my job. And here are the people and the places I'm learning from. That encourages me because that was not around 10 years ago.
Okay, so you're a culture change. Carrie, how is this landing with parents? I feel like there's no idea in education that education people can't make super complicated and indecipherable to parents, and I worry about that with this. Like with your members, science of reading, the changes, the literacy acts the states are passing. How's that landing? How are they perceiving this?
Well, this is like a no-brainer for us, and frankly, in our organization, which is a collective of 1,600 pockets of parent power in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. The fact that we had this great awakening during the pandemic because we saw the systemic failures happening in our living rooms, and we may not be literacy experts, but we know when our kid is well behind in reading, and we trust our gut and say, oh my gosh, this has got to be addressed with urgency. But we're not just going off of anecdote. The National Parents Union has done 38 national polls and actually asked parents deep questions around what they feel about literacy. And 86% of them believe that it is a national crisis. And just a month ago, we had 200 of our top parent leaders from 47 different states join us in Washington, D.C., meet directly with Senator Cassidy and Senator Reed to really bring this to a head, visiting all 435 offices, marching in there with their state-level data saying only 4 out of 10 kids in our state, at best, in places like Massachusetts, are proficient in reading. So parents are awake, they're aware. They also know that there are solutions that they need to be organizing around to force the system to change. And so what we have been able to be very successful in doing is building coalitions in places like Minnesota, where we just passed the READ Act last year, where now 1.3 million children in Minnesota are guaranteed the right to read proficiently by 3rd grade. If not, it will trigger interventions. And if that's not fulfilled, it actually creates an actionable right of action for parents to hold the system accountable, which we think is transformational because we have never seen large-scale transformational change in education without parents who are not just props, but actual plaintiffs and have standing holding the system accountable. So parents aren't just sitting back and waiting for the system to catch on to the great new fad of the science of reading. We are writing new policies. We are drafting new legislation, getting it passed, and now watching implementation to make sure it's done correctly.
So there will be pushback on this, right? Like reading is ideological, like for a bunch of reasons, frankly, going back centuries now. The teachers unions in some states are starting to push back on this. Ohio, California.
All states, I would say.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are your members, are they gonna, like, there is a political fight coming on some of this to maintain these laws, to maintain the training requirements, some of the rigor. Are your members going to, are they bought in? Are they aware enough, like when those fights start, that they're gonna hold the line? What's that gonna look like?
They are going toe-to-toe.
I mean, you're a skilled organizer. You were an SEIU organizer prior to this. Like, what is, from your perspective, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, we're seeing in state houses across the country. I mean, we have members who are going and testifying and sitting through 8 hours of testimony, listening to, the teachers union come up and testify and say you need to respect our expertise. Well, we're coming back and saying, well, 18% proficiency in reading is not an indicator of expertise in our view. So I would argue we have seen every excuse under the sun. All of the talking points around why we don't want to do this, we shouldn't do this. It's disrespectful to ask educators to learn, which is wild. But the fact of the matter is, I think that we are the great equalizer because we are the accountability. And so these parents are willing to step up and spend that 8 hours and testify and hold that line and hold them accountable for what is really irresponsible rhetoric around why this can't happen. Because the excuses come down to adults not wanting to exert the effort it takes, because this teaching, the science of reading, it's a science. It's a skill. You have to invest in professional development, and that takes effort and work. We're going to make them do it.
All right, so Tiffany, in a lot of circles, I want to hear how you guys are perceiving and your members are perceiving science of reading. I understand you have a toolkit that's going to be coming out soon and so forth. So I want you to talk about how they're perceiving it, and then also just there's a lot of concern that your members are making it harder to adopt high quality curriculum that, with books and so forth, it's creating either confusion or actually getting in the way of adoption processes. And we don't have yet there's limited numbers of providers of really good, high quality, knowledge rich curriculum right now. So talk about both those things.
It's a big question with a lot of elements and some interesting
That's why I asked
nuance. Yeah, that's fascinating. So thank you for having me here today. Thank you to the Reagan Institute. Really appreciate the invitation. I think Carrie is exactly right about the fact that parents need to be the ones to hold school districts and teachers and the system accountable for the failure that we've seen. American parents were largely unaware of how poorly their children were doing in school, and COVID happened, and I think there was a real awakening moment for parents sitting there and saying, wow, my child might be able to read the back of the cereal box, but can they pick up this chapter book and read it and understand what's in it? And the answer was no. It doesn't take an expert. You don't have to be an expert as a parent to know whether or not your child is reading well. And so as far as any criticism, I guess maybe I'd ask you to reframe the second part of that question.
Well, what you hear in a lot of policy circles is there's concern that it's getting harder. I mean, there's specific curriculum. There's EL education. There's wit and wisdom. That it's getting harder and harder to adopt, and people get concerned that they're going to get a political firestorm if we start adopting these. Meanwhile, a lot of the curriculum that's still widely in use, it really isn't science of reading aligned. It's not knowledge rich, and so it's putting state policymakers in a pickle.
Oh, well, state policymakers have a big job to do. It's an important job. They need to represent their constituency and do it well. So, it's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. And we're thankful that there are a lot of new people stepping up to do that job. I served as a school board
Well, we're all in it for the money, and I know.
Right.
So,
I served as a school board member for 4 years. And one of the things that I recognized and realized, and Carrie would probably say this too, there are a lot of opportunities for parents to engage in their local school systems. Whether or not they're taking those opportunities or aware of them is the question. And in the adoption of instructional materials, it's something that parents should and can have a big part of. They should have their voices heard. They need to be reviewing that information. And so, sometimes I think that people like to use the idea of chaos or disorder or interruption as an excuse because they don't like the scrutiny that's now being applied to a lot of the materials that are entering the classroom. Our moms and dads do have a lot of concerns about generative themes that are entering the classroom through some of the curriculum. And they're going to be paying attention as curriculum is adopted in their district and really taking a part at that most important ground level to have their voices heard so that they feel confident and good about the curriculum that's being introduced into the classroom.
terrific. Ralph, I know did you want to add one before we're going to move into school choice? But
Oh, I don't want to be standing between you and school choice. I mean, so what I would just wanted to put in the mix is when we ask governors and legislators to begin doing the political job and begin passing legislation and signing legislation, proposing legislation, this old sort of axiom, live by the sword, die by the sword? I think we are asking for a deeply politicized set of solutions. And in a country where there is significant division around almost all things politics, it's not going to be surprising if we get different answers in different states, in different contexts. I'm significantly more comfortable with seeing this as a matter of persuasion, seeing this as a matter of lifting up the exemplars, of helping parents and citizens to understand that there are choices and what those choices look like. That is the slow work, it's irritating, it's expensive, but it is what builds the foundational support. And this sort of end around, we've got more money than you, we've got more access than you. Well, that is going to lead to a hodgepodge of hardwired semi-solutions that I don't think is going to do very much for us in terms of advancing the issue, and I think will leave us worse off than we are. So I just want to go into the say, every time I hear a governor says, I'm going to be for this and against this in education, whether it's reading or anything else, I must admit I want to step back and say, please don't do that. Use your bully pulpit, use a lot of stuff, but please don't hardwire it into legislation and executive orders. Give folks a chance. Give parents a chance. Give educators a chance. Give all of us an opportunity to learn how to do this work, to do as well, to talk with each other, to argue each other, and to build the culture of support that we're going to need over time to sustain it.
Okay, I want to let Katie, because this is a fascinating tension on, with science of reading, what should you mandate and what should you persuade? And it's a strategic tension you're seeing playing out in different states. So I see you wanting to jump in, so we'll stay on this for a second.
The only reason I just wanted to respond is, you know, being at the state level and driving change with varying levels of community interest to move with urgency. What has been most helpful is, yes, best practice example, like we've talked about. Second, parents with me saying 1 in 5 is unacceptable. And the third piece that, right, wrong, or indifferent, that has been helpful is when the General Assembly has passed laws, it has given me a level of cover to drive fast. Faster than, and trust me, persuasion and empowerment is like the perfect thing. I would love for that to happen. But last year in Indiana, we had 14,000 children not reading. And we retained 410, and we're looking at our longitudinal data. These students are not catching up. So that's the balance of urgency, and why you will hear me say, and listen, behind the scenes, I'm very vocal with our General Assembly members.
I believe you.
Yeah, well, thank you. But that has been helpful to move faster than I think we would otherwise. Just Ralph wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, I think, as I said, I think it's a legitimate tension, and we're going to get a natural experiment of some different approaches to it in different contexts. Ralph, I want to come back, Katie, in a minute. I want to talk about all the school choice stuff in Indiana. But Ralph, I just want to start with you. Like, you've had sort of an evolution on school choice. Your thinking has changed in some ways. The evidence is, I think a lot of people have changed in different ways as they perceive this issue. So talk about sort of, you know, you're on the board of Stride now. You work for the school district in Philadelphia. You've done, lots of work in the different sectors in education. Just talk about how your thinking on choice has evolved.
Yeah, my own thinking of choice has not evolved as much as it appears. But first of all, let me say, even the notion that this is 30 years of school choice, from an old law professor, we'd like to say 100 years.
Yeah.
How many people have heard of Pierce versus Society of Sisters? Mm-hmm. Look it up. Pierce versus Society of Sisters was decided in 1925, argued in 1924, 100 years ago. And one could argue that was the original school choice case, where basically the Supreme Court disposed of an Oregon law that required compulsory education in public schools. And that law was ruled unconstitutional, and it opened the door. So we're at a new stage in school choice, but school choice has been around 100 years and will be around for 100 more. When I went to Philadelphia Public Schools to work with the superintendent, I went for one reason. Philadelphia was facing a desegregation order. And we managed, because of a courageous superintendent, to do something that had not been done. And that is to say, we, as a school district, had undereducated the kids in 42 racially isolated low achievers group. We undereducated them. And because we were able to stipulated to that, we were able to say, the remedy for undereducation is not transportation. The remedy for undereducation is better education. And we went into court and had the court support us that we would have a plan to educate those kids. And let me say, the plan worked well until it didn't. But we still had the fact that there were kids who were trapped in those schools. And so we instituted what we call the voluntary modified desegregation plan. And that was to say that any child in a school that historically had underperformed, that had failed for decades and generations should be allowed to leave that school, and leave that school not only with our permission, with our support. And we allowed parents, maybe 10 to 30% of the parents, to leave. And that, for me, was sort of the formation of a position that really took me to charter schools really early. It said that we should not ask parents to sacrifice their children for another generation in schools that don't work. Our obligation is to get the school to work, not to ask the parent to sacrifice.
That's right.
And so we essentially, we allowed those kids to leave, and my position has always been, but you know, to make sense of the world, you figure if he works for the school district, if he's pro-union, he must be anti-charter. You know, there's this way in which I've never, once I began working in Philadelphia and seeing what the issue was, it wasn't anti-charter, it wasn't the work I was doing, I wasn't out there. So this notion that somehow, you know, you've gone from being anti-charter to being pro-charter is now. I do think that public institutions have an obligation to understand the monopoly privilege that they have and to really do a better job than they do in listening to their constituents and their customers. I don't think public institutions and the people in public institutions are trained in a way to be customer responsive. And people in public education tend to treat their customers as the worst form of clients and not to pay enough attention to them and to view parent and family engagement as some sort of insurgency. And that insurgency mindset has led to this confrontation with a charter school movement that had mixed motives. There's all sorts of stuff you could say. But we've got a lot of folks who can share the blame. And really what school choice represents is a way to say to institutions, you know, we all make jokes about the DMV. Well, they may be the poster child for this, but it's not only, but to say to public institutions that you've got to be more customer oriented. And the way real accountability works is to give folks a choice to demand quality or to find quality. And I'll say lastly, I know it took too long, I'll say lastly that Bruno Mano, who's now with the Walton Foundation, came to Casey and was a really strong inspiration and teacher for me. And what Bruno said and position Casey is saying, we will help communities to build and improve the schools they have or to get the schools they want. And we're indifferent as to which one. We will help the community either way. And what we found, and that's why we supported Mayor Wilson and Bart
Peterson.
Bart Peterson in Indianapolis to create this whole generation of new schools, because the community says, we'll continue to build what we have, but we want to create what we need. And I think that's where I've been for a very long period of time, and I've learned a lot and really followed the work in Indiana, beginning with Indianapolis, and it's really exciting to see what's happening in terms of what parents are doing, and it is really attacking in a very important way the monopolistic tendency of public institutions.
So I had it backwards. The field is more caught up with you, and I think an interesting idea on that is Bruno Mano. I think I'm allowed to say this. I think it's public now. He's left Walton. He's now at the Progressive Policy Institute, which is a center-left think tank. And Bruno was an assistant secretary in the Reagan administration, as we're hearing. So I think the politics on this are also I'm not suggesting Bruno's politics. I don't actually know what they are, but just the folks who are working on these issues in different ways. It is changing. Carrie, I saw you nodding along with that. I want to where are your members on these questions of choice? I know you guys support public school choice. How do you decide how much latitude to have in choice systems and so forth?
Well, I can report that our last survey in April indicated that 91% of American families support increasing public school options. They want more options, they want more choice.
And how is that defined? Is that including charters, just public school choice?
Absolutely. Well,
what's
charter
that?
schools are public schools, so
Okay.
absolutely includes charter schools. So I would say this, which may be a radical concept, parents don't care about governance models. We are here for outcomes, and the outcome we are looking for is economic mobility for our children. We don't care if you call it a district school, a charter school, or Mickey Mouse Clubhouse. When the kids leave, we want to know that they are adequately prepared to access the jobs and the economy of the future, because we want our kids to have an easier life than we did. That's our hope for the future. So it's really not that complicated. I will say that when we talk about outcomes, we actually have to have some evidence, and that's why we strongly support assessment and accountability to hold all systems and all avenues of education accountable for how we're expending public dollars to make sure we're getting bang for our buck and we're getting kids to economic mobility. We need to have choices worth choosing. How do we know they're worth choosing? By having data, by having accountability, and making sure that we understand that these choices are viable and are actually going to get our kids to the promised land. So I would say that overall, the mood of parents is like, we just think it's wild that we're so held on to this 190-year-old antiquated system of delivering education in this country. It is 2024. And we still think that the gold standard of delivering education is, frankly, one white woman at the head of a classroom lecturing for hours on end, children over and over. And even when the outcomes tell us that we're not getting them, like, this is not the way. Brain science has evolved. Like, we know this is not how kids learn. It's not a best practice, but we as the adults are so comfortable that we will not change. So as parents, and frankly, there are a lot of students who are speaking out about this, we want to see the system grow and evolve and change. That's why at the National Parents Union, we're very excited about AI technology and new innovations and wanting to see the system grow and change and evolve so that we're embracing these new technologies, because it's 2024. You know, we hold computers in our hands 24/7, and we're, again, talking about banning things that make us uncomfortable or scared instead of understanding them and embracing them so that we can get our kids prepared for what, again, the jobs, the economy, and society of the future is going to look like.
And quick, just lightning round, do you all have a position on ESAs or vouchers, or is it covered by you want robust accountability and transparency? Like where are you on some of these other options?
You know, a lot of the programs, I would point to the proposal by the governor of Pennsylvania, which we thought was smart, around ESAs, which provided real guardrails around voucher programs. Because again, whipping checks at parents for $7,500 is not innovation, especially when you don't have access to high quality options, and there's no guarantee that that check is going to be used at a choice that's actually going to get your kid to the outcomes that they need to be able to be prepared for the jobs of the future. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. You know, we're kind of in the wild, wild west right now of ESAs, and again, some folks have choices between Chanel and Balenciaga, and some of us from the communities we represent have the choices between, you know, Dots and Payless. So not all choices are equitable, and until we can ensure that, like, we've got to watch this thing real close.
You just used 4 words, 2 of which I knew. I don't know what the one after Chanel even was, but I think I take the point. Tiffany, where are your members on this? Like, on this question of choice, and how is that playing out in all your various chapters?
Sure. Parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children. That includes their education, their medical care, their morality, and their religion. And we believe in education freedom. One of the things that I think I've seen Republicans and conservatives do in general is really cede public education and any role.
Really
Cede our role in public education and participating, and in really kind of just focusing solely on school choice. I think that's been a mistake, that we felt a lot of people that there was only one way to go about creating reform in public education, and we believe in reclaiming and reforming public education at Moms for Liberty. Our moms are committed to doing that.
What about school district boundaries? Are your members, would they be comfortable with kids moving across? Because a kind of choice, we treat these school district boundaries like they're like international borders. Would your members be comfortable with kids moving across them more freely?
Of course, no child should be trapped in a failing school. And what we've seen with universal school choice, I think, is really the marketplace responding to the demand. And it's going to take time, but I'm excited by a lot of the innovation that we've seen. I'm from Florida, and just in the past year, we have seen so many new schools opening up to really meet the demands of parents wanting to ensure, as Carrie said, that their children are getting what they need from public school.
Okay, so Katie, like reading choice, you hear people say like nothing's happening, and like the pace, I think, of choice plans expanding is simply remarkable, and stuff that like 15, 20 years ago would have been treated as like a 5-alarm fire by the education establishment just sort of happens because it's, May and a legislature's in session. So, universal vouchers in a number of states, all kinds of direct payment systems and so forth. So tell us what you all are doing. I mean, you just heard this conversation. Tell us what you're doing in Indiana to respond to that.
Yeah, so I mean, it is virtually a free market in Indiana where parents choose. Speaking of the question that you just asked about traditional public to traditional public, that choice is actually number one in Indiana for parents. And then we also have a really robust, and many of you know this about Indiana, we have a really robust school choice system. So the choice scholarship, that's about, 6% of our students use that. We're going up fast in that number. To an earlier panel about accountability, this is really, really key, and I think Carrie said this. In Indiana, every single school type is held highly accountable, and all of their data is transparent on indianagps.com. We are no nonsense on quality and being transparent for parents, all school types. So our choice scholarship is very, very popular. We also have a robust charter. Thank you, Ralph, for the shout out. It's super interesting story if you look at the Indianapolis story. Republican and Democrat mayors have been the authorizers in the city of Indianapolis for charter schools because they knew they had to do better. There's a Stanford study out that shows in Indianapolis, even when you look at poverty and a number of other factors with student population, in Indianapolis, the highest performing are our charter schools. Then the second are the mayor's authorized charter schools. And then last is our traditional public school. And granted, I'm good friends with that superintendent as well, but we have to lift all boats. And then the other thing I do want to shout out, during the pandemic, we did hear from a lot of parents who said, especially parents living in poverty, who said, I know my child is struggling. I know they're failing reading. I know they're failing math. I'm working 2 jobs. I can't pay for extra support. The teachers are doing the best they can to stay after with my child. So we launched something called Indiana Learns. It was a $1,000, basically like a mini ESA. And we wanted to try it, right? So that $1,000, we far surpassed the goal. Today it's serving over 20,000 children in Indiana. And they've had over 180,000 hours of tutoring, but we're watching that return on investment closely. But that's an interesting one. The other one I want to mention in school choice is, in one of the earlier panels, we heard a lot about rethinking high school, which, yes, is a topic all over the nation. But immediately you get from parents or community leaders or others, but, my child, we don't have the money to pay for the dual enrollment course to have them complete that credential of value. Or we don't have the money for them to have transportation from Perry County in the middle of Hoosier National Forest with no stoplight to Vandenberg County, which is their career dream. And so Indiana launched the Career Scholarship Account. It's called CSA, and it's open to all school types, all children, up to $5,000 for a sophomore, junior, or senior every year it restarts. And it specifically is focused on removing barriers for children at those grade levels to increase quality work-based learning and increase market-driven credentials of value. We want no barriers in the way. Now, that is new. It's still in its infancy. We're tweaking, we're learning, but those are just a few of the newest school choice elements in Indiana.
That's
I would
fantastic.
just share, I would just add on that if I could. Yes.
Very
Sorry,
briefly,
Val.
we're at time, so.
Knowing of the sense making and the binary, I want to be the one on this panel that will acknowledge that part of what constrains the conversation is because those of us who are critics and friendly critics know that there are folks who want to dismantle and destroy institutions, public institutions, including schools. So we're always reluctant to appear to give aid and comfort to them, and that has a chilling effect on the conversation. And I would not leave here
Did
without.
I make it sound like that?
No, not
Okay,
at all.
good.
Not
I'm having
all.
like, I'm sure my team is watching like.
You did not.
No,
Okay, good. Thank you.
not at all.
Yeah.
Those of us who are just concerned about fascism and,
Okay.
kind of like knee jerk.
I think we're all concerned about that, Ralph.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad we are.
Yeah.
And the point is, there's also folks who use charters and choice in this conversation to bash unions, to bash collective bargaining. And so those of us, when we join this, like me, when we join this conversation, we ought to declare that unions are essential to everything we do, everything we will accomplish, and to the workforce that
Nope.
we need today and tomorrow. And I don't want my longstanding support for choice and charter schools to let anybody think that collective bargaining is the problem or that unions are the problem. We have a lot of problems, but they are not.
That's one I
That's
think
a
we're gonna have
whole
to
nother
agree.
panel.
Yeah, it's a whole nother panel we have to agree, disagree
Now-
on. I will leave on a high note. I love the.
I do
yes,
wanna- I'm sorry.
You're standing between lunch, so be
Great.
really careful.
I just want to end on this note. Parents are the best experts for their children, so empowering parents to make good decisions for their children, supporting them in doing that is the way forward in America. Ralph, I feel like we'll have to come back to the Reagan Institute some point and talk about
Next year.
teachers' unions and the true impact that they have had on American education. Because 2 years of school closures and lawsuits to keep schools closed has shown American parents that we cannot trust the teachers' unions in America and the leadership. We love teachers, but I'll tell you what, the union bosses lead to learning losses.
So 2 views on the unions we can come back to. I want to end on the high.
We come back.
I want to end on the high note with Indianapolis. I look back on my career, and one of the things, I was a founding board member with Bart Peterson at the Mine Trust, getting those schools off the ground. I'm actually going out to have lunch with Bart here in a couple of weeks, and like the transformation there, and a lot of people said we were anti this or anti that, and the transformation there for kids has been remarkable, and it's something I look back on. I'm very happy that I was able to play a small role in it. Hey, thank you all so much for being here.